let's just dive right into this. We are about to embark on a journey into what is arguably one of the most intimidating, yet absolutely brilliant masterpieces of world literature, Herman Melville's Moby Dick. This explainer is going to strip away all that academic dust and plunge us right into the heart of the ocean. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth do we still care about a 150-year-old book about hunting a fish? Which, actually, quick side note, the book totally acknowledges is a mammal, but our narrator, Ishmael, stubbornly calls it a fish anyway just to mess with us. I really want to frame this explainer for you not as some dusty reading assignment, but as what it really is, a totally cinematic sea voyage that's basically wrapped around a deeply disturbing psychological thriller. All right, let's start with Section 1, the surface, blood, blubber, and industry. So before we get into all the heavy philosophy, we really need to understand the stark historical reality of this book. Back in the 19th century, whaling wasn't just some quaint, niche little job. Think of it like, well, it was essentially the space race and the oil boom combined into one extremely dangerous profession. Just look at this number, $20 million. Melville points out that the American whaling fleet at the time was worth a staggering $20 million, and it was bringing in $7 million in imports every single year. That is massive. It grounds our whole adventure in this high-stakes, ruthless capitalist reality. These guys were literally hunting monsters in the furthest, darkest corners of the globe just to keep the lamps and candles of the civilized world burning. And, these whalemen weren't just butchers out there on the water. They were the true pioneers of global trade and exploration. I mean, they charted totally unmapped archipelagos in unknown seas. They paved the way for the colonization of Australia, literally saving early settlements from starvation with their ship's biscuits sometimes. They even broke up those jealous Spanish colonial monopolies down in South America. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that we are dealing with a document of world-changing history, not just some made-up fictional story. Moving right along to Section 2, The Shallows, Ishmael's Mind. So let's talk about our narrator, Ishmael. He isn't just telling us a story, he's our philosophical guide, and he constantly pivots this epic from a high Greek tragedy straight into an absolute buddy comedy. He famously says he goes to sea whenever he feels a damp, drizzly November in his soul, basically to keep himself from stepping into the street and literally knocking people's hats off. Now, if you've ever actually tried to read this book, you've probably been completely thrown off by his weird, seemingly boring tangent chapters that just randomly pause the action, right? We get an entire system of cetology trying to categorize whales. We get chapters on the whiteness of the whale, whales depicted in paint and stone, a glowing review of Nantucket chowder of all things, and a whole chapter explaining something called a monkey rope. But listen, do not let these confuse you. They're essentially this wild, immersive 19th century Wikipedia built by a deeply curious mind. Ishmael is just trying to comprehend the universe by categorizing every tiny, messy part of his terrifying reality. And this brilliantly illustrates the central conflict of perspectives in the whole book. On one hand, we have our narrator, Ishmael, who is incredibly open, wandering, and philosophical. He accepts that the universe is vast and, fundamentally unknowable, and he survives because of that flexibility. But then, contrast that with Captain Ahab. Ahab is narrow, fixed, totally obsessed. He demands to strike through the mask of reality to find some concrete meaning underneath it all. Ultimately, it comes down to this. Ishmael floats because he can adapt, but Ahab sinks because he absolutely cannot yield. Which brings us to Section 3, the deep, Ahab's madness. This is exactly where the narrative shifts gears into a profound psychological character study. Captain Ahab isn't just some angry manager on a boat. He is a gray-headed, ungodly old man chasing an unmitigatable, supernatural revenge against the creature that bit off his leg. He's a man utterly consumed by a very specific condition, monomania. That's a form of partial insanity conceived as a single pathological preoccupation in an otherwise sound mind. He didn't just lose his leg to a whale and get mad about it. No, as Melville writes, Ahab deliriously transferred all his bodily woes and spiritual exasperations directly onto the white whale. For him, the whale basically became the living, breathing incarnation of all the malicious agencies in the universe. Just listen to this absolutely epic Shakespearean thunder from Ahab himself. When his practical religious first mate, Starbuck, accuses him of taking vengeance on a dumb brute, Ahab just yells, "Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me." Wow. So the crucial point here is that Ahab isn't just hunting a big animal anymore. This hunt, it's a rebellion against God, against nature, against fate itself. He feels the universe has profoundly wronged him, and he fully intends to stab it right back. Now we hit section 4, the abyss, the meaning of the monster. So what does Moby Dick actually represent? Because by now it is super clear we're dealing with way much more than just a large sperm whale here. Because he was hunted in the remotest, most uncivilized seas on Earth, Moby Dick became this creature of absolute myth. The legends going around among these isolated, terrified sailors were just wild. They spoke of his unprecedented magnitude and strength. They knew him from afar by his high, pyramidal white hump. But it goes way further into the supernatural. Some deemed him ubiquitous, actually believing he'd been encountered in opposite latitudes at the exact same instant of time. And the most terrified sailors out there, they believed he was literally immortal. The extreme isolation of the sea essentially birthed a demon. But getting to the core of Ishmael's own specific terror, he says, "It was the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. It wasn't the teeth, it wasn't the massive tail, it was the color, or, well, actually, the total lack of it." For Ishmael, the terrifying blankness of the whale shadows forth the heartless voids and immensities of the universe. It represents this terrifying possibility that behind the mask of nature, there is no benevolent God, no inherent meaning at all, just a blank, white, completely indifferent void. And finally, section 5, the cost of obsession. When you pit a monomaniacal captain against the immortal blank void of nature, things accelerate really quickly into a breathless, dramatic climax. This plays out over a frantic, totally cinematic timeline that Melville simply calls the chase. On day 1, the chase begins, and Ahab's boat is instantly bitten completely in half by the whale. Day 2, the boats are smashed again, and Ahab's ivory leg is completely shattered. Then, day 3 is the final confrontation. The terrifying prophecy of Ahab's doom is totally sealed. Moby Dick doesn't just attack the tiny hunting boats anymore. He turns his massive head and rams the actual ship, the Pequod, splintering it and sending the whole thing straight to the bottom of the sea. As his ship goes down and his entire crew is lost, Ahab makes his final, chilling strike. He screams, "From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee." He darts his harpoon into the whale, but the rope runs foul. And as he stoops to clear it, the flying turn of the line catches him right around the neck, and he is silently, violently dragged out of the boat and down into the very abyss he spent his entire life hunting. It's just wild. Which really leaves us with this final lingering thought. When purpose becomes obsession, are you steering the ship, or is the ship steering you? Ahab thought he was the ultimate master of his own fate, but his single-minded obsession turned his grand purpose into total destruction. It's a terrifying, beautiful lesson that makes Moby Dick just as vital today as it was the day it was published. We all have our fixations, right? Our relentless pursuits. So ask yourself, what is your white whale? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.